When it comes to health and well-being, our endocrine system is very important. And one of the challenges that we tend to run into is when a particular part of our endocrine system is out of whack. I'm talking about our thyroid. And there seem to be a growing number of people who have a host of different disorders that are related to the thyroid, which is why today I am delighted to be talking with my colleague, Dr. Eric Osanky, who is going to talk with us and highlight some of the things that you need to know about your thyroid. Eric, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure, Mira. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about thyroid.
I would love to start by asking, how did you get to this point where I'm talking to you about thyroid? Like, what's your backstory?
Yeah, so my backstory, I'm a chiropractor, and for a number of years, I was just practicing traditional chiropractic, just working on people's necks and backs and, just doing adjustments throughout the day. And I was diagnosed with initially hyperthyroidism, which then was diagnosed as Graves' disease. And up until that point, didn't really have much experience with that. But as when I was getting my continuing education credits as a chiropractor, I would always take courses that focus on nutrition. And there were a couple of courses that focused on functional endocrinology. And so when I was diagnosed with Graves, I didn't know if I'd be able to restore my health and get into remission, but I knew I was going to at least attempt to do it naturally and try to avoid the medication and some of the other harsh treatments that that are commonly recommended to others with hyperthyroidism. And so, long story short, I did things through diet and lifestyle, took some supplements, and again, we could certainly talk about some of these things. But I eventually was able. This was 2008. I was diagnosed, so I've been in remission since 2009, and then started working with others who have both hyperthyroidism and Hashimoto's. I will say that more people see me for hyperthyroidism, including Graves, just because that's my backstory. But yeah,
Mhm.
that's in a nutshell of how I started helping others with, hyperthyroidism.
Wow, that's amazing. And, it's really wonderful that, to know that there are solutions out there that don't require medication. That doesn't mean that we're dissing the medical route. It just means we like to start with that more functional approach. And obviously, for you and a lot of the people that you work with, that works very, very well. So that's great. I'd love it if you would take just a minute to talk about the clinical difference between hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism, because I'm not sure that everybody understands that.
Sure. So with hypothyroidism, that's more common than hyperthyroidism, and that's when thyroid hormone gets too low. So on a blood test, that presents as having low thyroid hormones, typically T3 and T4, the hormones that they test for throughout the blood. And then there's a pituitary hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. And so with hypothyroidism, you usually see that elevated because the TSH is trying to stimulate the thyroid gland to produce more thyroid hormone. And then with hyperthyroidism, it's the opposite. You have too much T3 and T4. You have
Mm.
elevated levels of the thyroid hormones, and that TSH usually is low, if not undetectable, just because it's trying to slow down the production, trying to tell the thyroid, no more thyroid hormone. So just
No.
slowing that down. And then the symptoms vary between the two. So when someone has low thyroid hormone levels, you commonly see symptoms such as fatigue, weight gain, coldness, constipation, sometimes brain fog. Whereas with hyperthyroidism, things are sped up. So when I dealt with hyperthyroidism, for example, I had some of the classic symptoms, which include tachycardia, which is increased resting heart rate, heart palpitations, anxiety is common, weight loss. Not everybody experiences weight loss with hyperthyroidism, but I lost 42 pounds when I dealt with hyperthyroidism. Yeah, increased appetite, sometimes loose stools. So yeah, those are some of the main differences between the 2.
Wow. And so for anyone who's listening, can we also talk about Hashimoto's on the low end, obviously the hypothyroid end, and how that's slightly different than hypothyroid, like classic hypothyroid?
Sure. Well, most thyroid conditions, not just um, hypothyroidism, but hyperthyroidism are autoimmune. So they're really more immune system conditions and endocrine conditions. And so with Hashimoto's, that's when your immune system attacks your thyroid gland. And it's characterized by also, like in a blood test, you'll see elevated thyroid antibodies, which you'll see also with Graves', but there's different types of thyroid antibodies associated with each one. And so with Hashimoto's, you're getting, again, damage to the thyroid gland by the immune system. So some people do need to support the thyroid in the meantime. They might need to take thyroid hormone replacements. But also, you want to try to do things to address the cause of the problem, try to address the autoimmune component. And with Graves', it's similar. Graves', it's not damaging the thyroid gland, it's more the immune system stimulating the thyroid gland, but still some people need to take actually, a lot of people do need to take either medication or the herbs like I did, but you don't want to just do that. And that's the mistake most endocrinologists make, which we could definitely talk more about.
I love it. Can we talk more about that? Because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They think that if they are just taking the medication, like, their levels come out okay, and they're like, "I'm taking my medication, but I still feel like garbage." So, I would love it if you could address some of these other things that we can do to add into the plan of care.
Sure. I mean, well, again, endocrinologists for Hashimoto's, it's typically just thyroid hormone replacement. If they see the TSH elevated, they a lot of times they don't. Most of the time, they don't pay attention to the immune system. And then with hyperthyroidism and Graves, specifically talk about here. Again, they'll usually give either anti-thyroid medication or they'll give radioactive iodine, which is obliterating the thyroid gland, or thyroid surgery. So it's a lot more extreme when it comes to Graves, when it comes to the treatment methods. So yeah, endocrinologists don't do anything. And I mean, we both know that when it comes to not just autoimmunity, Mira, but all these chronic health conditions, that diet plays a big role. I mean, there are other factors, but we know diet's huge. Yet, if you ask an endocrinologist, most endocrinologists, there's exceptions, but 95% of them will say, "Oh no, diet doesn't, that doesn't make a difference." And I've had countless patients ask the endocrinologist, if I change my diet, will that help? And it's usually a negative response. Most of the time, it's no, absolutely not. Diet is not going to help at all. And, which we both know is crazy when it comes to any chronic condition. But
Well, I'm gonna say as a holistic nutrition educator, I feel food first in anything we do, regardless of what the other, interventions are, and food always as part of what we're doing. We wanna make sure that we're not just feeding, but nourishing our body so it has the resources that it needs to be able to address whatever is going on. So I'd love to hear what are some of your favorite food-based suggestions for people who are dealing with thyroid-related disorders?
sure. So, I mean, with both Hashimoto's and Graves', and really, I mean, all even if it's a non-autoimmune thyroid condition,
Mm.
obviously the focus should be on eating whole, healthy foods while avoiding the refined foods and sugars. Obviously, if you're doing that, the ingredients, the harmful ingredients that you talk about, you're going to be avoiding if you just focus on whole, healthy food. So, I mean, I do recommend more of a plant-based diet, not necessarily vegetarian. I can't say I'm vegetarian, but still focusing more on eating plenty of vegetables, eating some fruits, and then if you're gonna eat meat like I do, just eating healthier sources like organic grass-fed beef and, organic, if you can have like pasture raised poultry, for example. And so there's different types of diets and there's no single diet that fits everyone perfectly. So I usually like more of either a paleo diet or an autoimmune paleo diet, at least as a starting point. Just and that like so many listening to this or watching this probably are familiar with what a paleo diet is. Again, meat, vegetables, fruits, fish, so seafood, and then eggs, nuts, seeds. So with autoimmune paleo or autoimmune protocol, that involves avoiding eggs just because potentially there are compounds in eggs like the egg whites, that could affect the gut health in some people, and then nuts and seeds. Just again, these are temporary changes. I mean, I can't say I never eat. I definitely eat eggs now, and I eat nuts and seeds. But while healing, some people do better avoiding those foods. And then the nightshades, such
Mm,
as tomatoes, eggplant, white potatoes, and peppers. Again, not everybody does. I mean, a lot of people do fine with them, but it's almost like to play it safe. They can be in some people inflammatory, especially with autoimmune conditions. So, but there are some people that just follow a paleo diet. They don't follow AIP, or
mhm.
maybe in some cases even follow like a modified paleo. But I mean, really, you definitely want to avoid like the gluten. Definitely recommend while
Right.
healing, avoiding gluten free. Dairy, I usually recommend taking a break from at least while healing. And then same thing with grains, take a break for with grains. And then, yeah, it goes without saying, like things like, fast food, like unhealthy oils and the artificial ingredients.
And I think it's also important to note that first of all, there is no one size fits all diet for everybody. And that when we embark on a healing protocol, let's say someone does decide to do autoimmune paleo, it doesn't mean that you're going to be on that for the rest of your life. I mean, you may be, it may turn out that that's the perfect fit for you, but for a lot of people, that's a foundational place to allow your body to recover from so many of the symptoms and issues that are going on. And then we begin a slow and very attentive process of adding foods back in to make sure that they're a good fit. Like you said, not everybody has to avoid nightshades, but it's often helpful when people are having certain symptoms to stop that just to allow the body to calm down. And then we slowly reintroduce them a little bit at a time to figure out how much can you take. When someone is dealing with something like Graves, for example, I know because of how stimulating it can be to have too much thyroid hormone. What are some of the other strategies that you recommend to help them? Like, do you suggest any kind of mindfulness practices or lifestyle practices to help them sort of calm down and slow down because their body's on overload?
Without question, yeah. I mean, stress is huge when it comes to, I mean, really all health conditions, but in the literature, there is a relationship between stress and chronic stress and Graves' disease. And so that's one of the big areas I focus on besides diet is, just whether it's meditation or yoga. But yeah, I agree, some type of mind body medicine and just doing it on a daily basis. I think the problem with stress management for a lot of people is they might go to a yoga studio like 2 times a week, and that's their stress management. And so well, from a diet perspective, you wouldn't say, "Oh, just like 2 or 3 days a week, just like eat healthy and the other days don't worry about it." So to me, you ideally want to do something from a management perspective every single day. And so what I try to have my patients do, and then when I educate others, I just tell them to start with 5 minutes per day, whether it's again, it's might be just simple deep breathing, maybe it's doing yoga, maybe it's a combination. Maybe a few days you go if you're going to a yoga studio and you want to keep up with that, that's fine. But the other days you do yoga at home or you do, some meditation or tai chi. But either way, 5 minutes a day and then get in the routine of stress handling. And then you could gradually increase. But if someone starts with 20, 30 minutes, not to say people don't do that and be consistent daily, but more people just stop doing it. They fall off the wagon. So really that's my approach when it comes to stress management. Do something every day, even if it's just 5 minutes. And then eventually, hopefully you'll increase. But even when you increase, maybe you're on vacation. And rather than just stop it completely and getting out of the routine, just go back to 5 minutes per day while you're on vacation, for example.
I love that. That is such a great suggestion. And I also like that the practices that you're talking about, Tai Chi and yoga, those are all very gentle, restorative practices. What is your feeling about people who are perhaps more physically active? They're runners or marathoners or that kind of thing? Because I know having some kind of a thyroid health condition, especially Graves, you can actually overexhaust yourself. And yet, for so many of those people, they just want to push through. What's your answer to them?
I'm glad you asked that question because prior to getting diagnosed with Graves, I was not running marathons, but I was definitely overtraining in the gym. I was doing more than my body can handle, and I wasn't listening to my body, which with my background, I should have known better, but I didn't. So I get it. I understand people want to be active, and I've worked with people who like to run marathons and triathlons, and what I tell them is while you're healing, I know it's difficult, but you don't want to overexert yourself. I think from a resistance like I do recommend resistance exercise. Again, not going too heavy, like when it comes to weights, or people could use bands or even their own body weight. But I think that's a good idea because a lot of people with Hashimoto's, as well as probably more so even hyperthyroidism with increased metabolism, are losing muscle mass, and so that I recommend. But when it comes to cardio, I'm usually recommending light walking, not going like heavy on the elliptical machine, or again, running or even jogging. Again, I understand people wanted to do that. And I'm not saying it's permanent, just like AIP is usually not permanent. Same thing. You just, while you're healing, you want to take care of your body. And, once you're in a better state of health, then you could do maybe some high intensity interval training. If someone is a marathon runner, again, gradually get back into that. But yeah, while healing, I definitely recommend being more conservative, especially with the cardiovascular exercise.
That's great, and I think that's such good advice because often if people are active, their other providers aren't saying anything to them about the need to slow down, and that can be a very important part of recovery, so I'm really glad that you talked about that. I know you have a book, don't you, on thyroid?
I have two. I actually have so my first book in 2011, Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves' Disease. That was released. And then 2 years ago, I updated it with the second edition. And then actually, I just updated for the first time in 10 years. I have the third edition of Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves' Disease. And then I also released a book on Hashimoto's called Hashimoto's Triggers. This was in 2018 to help people find or remove their triggers. I mean, quite frankly, I could have changed the title to Graves' disease triggers because a lot of it, not everything, I mean, it is more catered to Hashimoto's, but I'd say 70% of the information there also could help people with different types of autoimmune conditions because regardless of the autoimmune condition, it's a lot of it comes down to finding, removing triggers, including food, like we spoke about, including stress, as we also spoke about.
Wow, that's very cool. Well, this has been really wonderful and information-packed session. Thank you so much for helping us take this deep dive into thyroid health and especially focusing a little bit more on Graves' disease. I know a lot of people tend to focus on the Hashimoto's thing and the Graves people probably feel ignored. So I'm grateful that we can talk about that and share. Is there anything else that you would like to share, like how people can get in touch with you or something else that you have available that you'd like them to know about?
Sure. Well, besides the books, definitely check out my podcast. It's both for those with hyperthyroidism and Hashimoto's, and it's called Save My Thyroid. And they could visit either the website, savemythyroid.com, or they could just go to that favorite podcast platform like Apple, Spotify, and just type in Save My Thyroid. So I guess Save My Thyroid podcast, the books as I just mentioned, and then I do have my original website, naturalendocrinesolutions.com, that actually has hundreds of articles and blog posts. So if someone's more of a reader, they might want to visit naturalendocrinesolutions.com. If they rather listen to conversations like we're having now, then they could visit the Save My Thyroid podcast. And again, if they want to read, they could also read the books Hashimoto's Triggers and the one I have on hyperthyroidism and Graves.
Well, that sounds great. Eric, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us. And very much appreciated. For everyone who's listening, I will have all the links down below to the books, the podcast, his website. And I encourage you to check them out so you can learn more and hopefully find some solutions for yourself. Thank you for being here. And remember, in all you do, to make today a healthy day. Bye, folks.